Alexa Lavoie here for Rebel News, and today I'm at the Centre de Foire in Quebec City to discuss the new radical anti-gun activist candidate endorsed by Mark Carney. I will be speaking with Jason Warren, Provincial Field Agent Manager of the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights, and also Sadi Desuro, podcaster at the podcast Au Pas de Tir. The candidate in question is Nathalie Provost from the Canadian anti-gun organization Police se souvient. She is a survivor of the Polytechnic shooting, one of the most tragic attacks in Quebec history. But here is the thing. Madame Provost has become a radical activist determined to strip away the rights of legal gun owners.
Our first request in January 1990 was we asked students, professors, the community of Polytechnic asked for a ban, a total and permanent ban on assault-style weapons. That's our first and main request, and it's an historical request.
The issue with gun is not with criminal guns. It's with legal gun owners that have issues, and we must protect our families.
And as you may know, the Liberals are fully aligned with this agenda.
You want to highlight, because you've spoken about gun crime, that, one of the things that makes gun crime possible is guns on the streets. And that is why our government is acting so decisively to get guns off the streets in Canada. That's why we have banned military-style assault weapons. Why should people have them? They should not. These make our lives more dangerous. That's why our government has introduced a freeze on handguns. These are policies that make Canadians safe, that make Canadian families safe, that make women and girls and children safe. That is why our government is committed to them. And I do want to point out, the Conservatives have voted against those really obvious elementary measures that we need to make us safer.
Since May 2020, the federal government has banned more than 2,500 varieties of what it calls assault-style firearms. Those prohibited guns can no longer be used, bought, or sold in Canada. Ottawa have also created a buyback program in order to buy the legal guns that are here in Canada. But since then, since 2020, the government has spent $67 million on the program. And according to government documents, that figure is expected to rise to approximately $100 million by the end of the fiscal year. Rather than addressing the real issue, illegal firearms being smuggled into Canada, they are targeting law-abiding gun owners. And instead of tackling the root causes of gun violence, they find it easier to virtue signal by restricting legal gun ownerships, where there is less resistance. But does Mark Carney even know who is Nathalie Provost? The last time he mentioned her, he mispronounced her name and made major mistake about the shooting. She survived. Watched.
You want des défenseurs de la justice sociale, comme Nathalie Provost à Montréal. Nathalie Provost, who out of the tragedy of the shootings at Concordia.
And today we introduce you to yet another Liberal candidate. And to learn more about others, visit meettheliberals.com.
Right.
You had some concern about her candidacy to the Liberal Party.
Absolutely.
Can you explain why?
First of all, because she definitely has some bias. So I don't really see how she could represent in a non-biased way her constituents. So yeah, that's the main concern. She seems to feel, according to what she's said, that licensed hunters and sport shooters are the biggest part of the problem. Even when we think about it, she's always trying to get all of the attention of the government on licensed gun owners. And I rarely see them speaking about actual criminals. Actually, I can't think of an instance where they even mention fact that most of the crime in Canada, the gun crime anyway, is committed by criminals, not hunters, not sport shooters. So that's our main concern, really.
My concern with that is that it, as you said, it provides somebody within the party to give advice on firearms legislation, somebody who doesn't have a PAL, who hasn't gone through the training. Unfortunately, there's always one side that's heard and not the other one, and it's the side of more gun control, and never the side of what we have right now as gun control is enough. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, a lot of the laws that are here now that were placed since the Liberals came into power just target legal gun owners. We've talked about how these laws that were put in place to protect the public, unfortunately, gun crime is up. It's not changing. It's gotten worse, in fact, since 2015, much worse. So if these laws were actually useful, we would see an increase, or rather a decrease, in shootings in our major centers like Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal, etc. But we're not seeing that. We're seeing something else. So I think the target here is the wrong target. If you excuse the wordplay here, you're taking aim at the wrong target. You're targeting people who, by definition, follow the law, who will eventually have no other choice but to give their guns back through the buyback program for the May 2020 ban, for example, the 1,500, now 2,500 models of firearms that were banned. These people will have to give their firearms back, and the vast majority of them will comply because they're legal gun owners. Whereas, specifically in that OIC of 2020, it specifically says that illegal guns, you have to be a PAL owner to be able to be eligible for the buyback. So if you have an illegal gun, don't even show up. You won't be eligible for that buyback program at all. So I think that sends a clear message here as to why there's a worry, because we're not doing the right thing for public security. We all want public security. I think everybody, left, right, conservative, liberal, we just want people to be safe. And we're saying, well, we want the same thing. We want people to be safe. I want to be safe, and so do you. So do the right thing, do the hard thing, instead of taking aim at the easy targets, because with the PAL, they know where we are. They know in some certain circumstances, they know what we have, and so it's an easy target to pick on us. It's a much harder job to do the cleanup that you need to do to prevent crime.
Well, I'm expecting now that they're basically done with sporting rifles and pistols, I'm expecting that they're going to move on to semi-automatics that are used for hunting. Now we're starting to see different hunting rifles showing up on their prohibition lists. So hunters are now starting to feel a little more concerned, starting to speak up, starting to join groups like the CCFR and others. So we are seeing now that they are about to move on to the next stage, which will be attacking hunters and their rifles.
The issue with gun is not with criminal guns. It's with legal gun owners that have issues, and we must protect our families.
Right, so there's a video running online where she basically made an interview on CPAC where she was talking to the CPAC news channel and basically explained that the problem was not with criminal guns, but with legal gun owners. Now, that's just a direct quote. I'm not making things up. You can actually look that up online. So it kind of gives you the mindset of what she's thinking. She goes on to explain other things in French and English, and obviously there's a bigger context to that. But that's the kind of statement that people will take at face value and then run with that and then say, well, the problem is gun owners, right? Legal gun owners, right? The problem is not criminal guns, or illegal guns, it's criminal guns. And, I keep saying to people who want to talk to us, well, if there was such a big problem with fentanyl coming from Canada into the States, well, there's a big problem with firearms coming from the States to Canada. Maybe there's something to be done from that side as well to prevent these illegal guns from crossing here. And, a lot of the police organizations actually agree to that. It's like, I think the Toronto Police Association said something like 80% or 90% of legal guns are sourced from the United States illegally, smuggled through our border. So I think if we tackle that 90% of illegal guns, we do a much bigger impact than if we just target legal gun owners who are using them for sports shooting or hunting. But clearly that's where I think Canada should invest. It's one thing for Trump to blame us for the fentanyl coming in from them, if that's even a problem. That's a completely different discussion. But Canada should do its own work on its own borders regardless. And inspecting the things that are coming into Canada should be Canada's responsibility. I think that, a lot of parties have expressed that they want to increase border security through different means, and that should be something we look into and take seriously if we want to reduce crime, smuggling, drugs, and everything else, not just firearms, right? It's a whole slew of criminal activity that could be improved if we had more secure borders here in Canada. Obviously, since Polytechnic shooting, there's been a slew of additional firearms legislation that has passed. The first one is the reform on the Firearms Act, and that's increased the requirements for eligibility to firearms owners, right? So before you could just go and buy a firearm, it was the old laws. Now you have to go through a process and get yourself a possession and acquisitions licenses, right? The older crowd knows this a little bit as the firearms acquisitions license or something, the FAL or something like that. But right now it's really the PAL, right? So the possession and acquisitions license that you need to get, or the restricted possession and acquisitions license, which is a different training that you need to get separate from the original license. And that one allows you to have restricted firearms like handguns, or used to allow you to have restricted firearms like handguns. And in Quebec, you had to get something else, which was called the Law 9, which is another law that was added after, it's called the anesthesia law, which was after another shooting here in Quebec. They basically passed legislation that requires additional training for Quebecers to own these firearms, the restricted firearms specifically. Again, this is all before C-21 now, which basically prevents anybody in Canada from owning firearms or owning these new firearms. If you already have them, you can keep using them. But if something happens to it, it breaks, gets damaged, well, you're out of luck, unfortunately. Well, obviously, the new legislation that they've put in place, in my opinion, doesn't really do anything for public security, but it gives the impression of public security because you're taking guns off the streets, but you're taking them away from legal gun owners who are using those guns for legal purposes that are outlined in that law, the Firearms Act that I was talking about earlier, which is, hunting, sports shooting, and collection. And I would go as far as to say that in the community, passing those firearms along to your descendants, right, is something that happens quite often, right? Grandpa's old firearm, his old rifle that he used to go hunting with, well, now, that's something that gets passed along. It's a heritage that you move along. And even if your spouse doesn't have a firearms license, you can go through a process and get those firearms sold off and get the money back from those firearms. And if you keep those firearms well maintained, you actually get a lot of money back from that. Usually it follows inflation. So if you bought the firearm and it cost, I don't know, $500 back then, and now it's worth $1,600, there's a good chance it'll still be $1,600, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, depending on what it is. And some firearms get really, really high in price because they're limited quantities, and so you might end up with a firearm that you paid very little for, and you might get 5 times the price for it, but that's usually not the case. Most firearms that are on the market usually just evolve with inflation and keep their value over time if they're well maintained.
The buyback is only for legal guns, so they're not buying back any guns from criminals on the street. This is for sure. So yeah, the buyback program oddly concerns rifles, which are very rarely used in crime. Even the criminals don't use rifles to commit their crimes. So yeah, there is the buyback program that's been put in place 5 years ago now. And we wonder if it's ever going to come to fruition. We're not sure if they're ever going to buy back a single gun. And like you were saying, they've already spent millions of dollars on bureaucracy, basically. Millions of wasted dollars on bureaucracy, and not one gun has been bought back yet. They have started buying back some guns from different businesses. There's a program for businesses who have been held up by this buyback, who have had hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money tied up in this prohibition. So some businesses have sold back some guns. I think they said 7,000 guns had been bought back. And just the term buyback, it doesn't make much sense because we never bought guns from the government. We bought guns from different businesses. So the whole term itself, buyback, for me, is kind of manipulative in the sense that it makes the normal person who doesn't know about guns feel like we're selling them back to the government, but they never really came from the government in the first place. So, I mean, it doesn't make much sense to have started the buyback program for rifles. At best, it should have been for pistols. But for some reason, instead of doing a buyback for the pistols, they've done what they call the handgun freeze, which means that you can no longer transfer, you can no longer buy, there's no grandfathering clause. So basically, I'm a pistol owner and I'm an IPSC shooter, I do sport shooting, so I can continue doing my sport shooting for the rest of my life. But when I die, my guns will be confiscated and there will be no compensation.
I think every gun owner has the same worry to some extent, and even hunters who don't want to fight with us, with the CCFR, or join the fight, if you will, I think they all have the same worry. You know, if we make too much noise, if we raise our hand, then we'll be next. We'll be the next ones. We'll be the next ones, right? And today it's semi-automatics with, you know, high capacity magazines that are, you know, limited to 5 rounds here in Canada, but tomorrow it's going to be lever action rifles and pump action shotguns because they can hold quite a few rounds as well. There's no restrictions on the magazine size for these, or tube magazine, depending if it's detachable or not. So you can actually load, you know, 5 rounds, 10 rounds into a magazine that's for a pump action, a manual action firearm, and after that, well, why do you need so many rounds, right? So they're going to restrict that. They're going to put more restrictions. Why do you need a pump action shotgun for hunting? Why do you need a lever action? Why do you need a bolt action? Can't you just use a single shot? And then why do you need to go hunting at all? Why do you need to do sports shooting, right? It's not a need in our society to do sports shooting. Well, you don't need a car that can go 200 miles an hour, but here we are with, you know, cars that have super high acceleration that can go from, you know, 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in 2.6 seconds driving in our streets. Why do you need that, right? The question is not why we need it. The question is, it's a legal thing to have. People have been using them responsibly for the major part of it, right? And targeting us is just a way to, as I said earlier, just to make easy points, easy political wins, and get the population to vote for you.
Don't forget to go over meettheliberals.com. We will get you informed about the new candidate that have controversy behind their chin. So you can learn everything over there at meettheliberals.com.